Hello and welcome to Strat News Global. I am Surya Gangadharan. The conflict in West Asia is seeing new highs. We have enormous number of casualties, especially on the Palestinian Arab side. We have some casualties, although serious enough, in Israel. And we also have a stream of Hamas rocket attacks in Israel. So that has created a fair amount of concern and anxiety in Israel too. I have with me Professor R Kumaraswamy. He's a well-known West Asia specialist based in Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Professor Kumaraswamy, glad to have you.
Thank you very much.
So what is your reading of the conflict as of now? We've seen more than 1 week of fighting and rocket attacks. What's your reading?
To put it very briefly, I don't visualize anything to end anytime soon. That's the first part. Because each side wanted to take a step which eventually culminated in this conflict. The tension was very much there, both between Israel and Hamas, and between Israel and the Palestinians, and between the Palestinians and the wider Arab world, for a variety of reasons. And therefore, all of them culminated in this conflict. To unpack the situation, Israel took a number of steps in Jerusalem and other areas which provoked the Palestinians. Similarly, Palestinians did a few things which provoked Israel for it.
Yeah.
And in the larger context, nothing was happening on the Israeli-Palestinian front. And if you look at the last 2 years, a number of prominent Arab states were able to normalize relations even without any progress on the Palestinian front. So therefore, you felt left alone by the Arabs, by the international community. The frustration was very much. So the spark in the form of protest came over the situation in Sheikh Jarrah and other areas. But eventually, what you have is the rocket launches from Gaza. And we are entering the 8th day. And I don't see any immediate end to that for two reasons. One, both sides are determined to continue the fight. There is no any indication that they want an early ceasefire or cessation of hostilities. And most importantly, you don't see any international player who could bridge the gap and bring about an immediate ceasefire. So while everybody wants an early end to that, I don't see anyone playing an important role in bringing about it.
This conflict seems to have underscored the once again that Hamas is a big player here, perhaps even bigger than the PLO. Is that what we're looking at going forward?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you look at the history from '88, ever since Hamas was formed, it was challenging the mainstream Palestinian national movement. In '74, the international community recognized PLO as a sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
But Hamas refused to accept that. Initially, it challenged Fatah, the dominant group in PLO. Then it challenged the PLO itself. But now it is challenging the Palestinian Authority. And over a period of time, they were able to establish a credible position within the Palestinian community as a very defining force. And they won the 2006 elections. If the elections were held on 22nd as originally planned, Hamas would win hands down. No issues on that. And therefore, what you are seeing is probably a beginning of the marginalization of the PLO and also the Palestinian Authority. So, but you and I may look at the casualties Hamas is suffering in Gaza Strip. Already it has crossed 200 plus, and so much destruction. Some of the prominent leaders were killed. But if you look at it, Hamas does not depend on individuals.
Yeah.
It's not like Fatah and the PLO, everything had to revolve around the leader. Hamas is more an ideology and a movement. So therefore, any amount of leadership eliminated by Israel, always find an alternative. So therefore, what we are looking at is Hamas could emerge as B or almost on par with PLO in terms of international recognition. Put it simple English. After the present crisis, even if you don't agree with Hamas, don't agree with Hamas strategy, even if you think Hamas is bringing more miseries to the Palestinian people, there is no way the international community can ignore Hamas as a player.
So do you expect Hamas to now start expanding in the West Bank also?
It has some influence. It's not that it never had an influence. It had an influence. Probably that influence would grow for two reasons. One, Hamas is seen as someone who is resisting against Israel, something Arafat and the PLO and everybody over a period of time gave up. And the second thing is, Abbas is in Elma Fafa since 2005 when he was elected president. In the last 16 years, he has nothing to show. No major accomplishment towards realizing the Palestinian statehood.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Trump's plan, he said, slap of the century. Okay, beyond that, what did he do? He could not prevent the Arab countries to normalize relations with Israel. So, he's aging without any clear second-rank leadership. And if you are a West Bank Palestinian, it's a hopeless case.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you look at the West Bank Palestinians, on three previous occasions, 2008 and 9, 2012, 2014, when Israel was fighting Hamas in Gaza Strip, West Bank was quiet.
Yeah.
That is not the case today. So which basically means both Hamas emergence as a good alternative who can resist Israel, and also the weaknesses of Palestinian Authority means Hamas influence in the West Bank will grow now than say 10 days ago.
So all the more reason then for Israel to look at perhaps eliminating Hamas from the Gaza Strip, perhaps even fast forwarding its settlements in the West Bank and other places?
Elimination of Hamas, I'm not sure what it means. You can eliminate a leader, but can you eliminate an ideology? I'm not sure. And even with all the Israeli weapons, there is always instruments and available to Hamas to attack Israel. But what Israel can probably consider is to give an alternative, saying that, an accommodation with Israel is a better strategy than a confrontation with Israel. I think that could be a much better alternative than trying to eliminate it. So what you can do today is you can scale down the Hamas military capabilities. Yes, that you can do that. The second thing is we can also make it prohibitive. The kind of destruction taking place, which means in future Hamas will think more than twice before launching an attack.
So does the conflict, the longer it continues, I'm looking at the internal Israeli politics. Does it help Netanyahu? Does it help him?
In Israel, all the controversies have a lifetime of 1 week. So next week you have another controversy or another problem comes. So the Netanyahu's gain at this point of time is only that window of opportunity. It could complicate the formation of a government, and probably if they don't agree on the government, they may work for an alternative mechanism. Even if the opposition doesn't form a government, the third option will be the president asking any member of Knesset to form a government. So Israel is working on that kind of situation. But everyone rallying around Netanyahu today is only a tactical move. It is not that Netanyahu can come back to opposition. No. But the interesting thing is, both Hamas and Netanyahu are viewing the conflict to consolidate the power. Netanyahu to consolidate his position, Hamas does the same thing.
Yeah.
It looks like, almost two extreme positions fighting the conflict, which is bringing more misery to the people, with a very narrow interest of consolidating the power. So Netanyahu's chances of staying in office is not substantially increased by this conflict. Marginally, yes, not substantially.
And doesn't help the cause of that of the opposition party trying to seek an accommodation with that Arab group, the Islamic Front or something?
That would be a little complicated. Right now, before the war, yes, the Islamic movement was going. What has happened is the Islamic movement going with Netanyahu is very difficult. But eventually, I would say that, the kingmaker would be the religious parties. The ultra-Orthodox religious parties, they are going to be the kingmaker. Israel is a Jewish state in the demographic sense of the word, in the historical sense of the word. So you cannot have a government without some Jewish parties on board. There is no way you can survive. So what is happening is some of the ultra-Orthodox leaders were actually complaining that we supported Netanyahu last 4 elections, but he's not able to form a government. He's actually dragging us to the 5th elections. So is it time to switch sides? Which is not unusual. Because this is the switching of the sides in 77 resulted in Begin coming to power. Begin did not win the election. The Labour lost the election. So the religious party changed sides. So we cannot rule out that kind of a possibility, because if the one religious party moves, all the groups, they will move together. For the simple reason, they don't want to stay in opposition. They want to be part of the government for a variety of reasons, primarily financial benefits they get as part of the government. So in that situation, if they are able to provide a convincing alternative, the religious parties might switch sides for a political stability, and which will enable the Arab parties to support such a government from outside. Because, it is still, in Israel, is a politically sensitive for a government to depend on the support of the Arab party. It's still, you can argue rights and wrongs. The question is, it's still difficult. So once a religious party comes on board to the anti-Netanyahu positions, then it becomes, you are not depending on the Arabs. It's what you would call an extra majority.
So last question about India. We've been calibrating our position on the Palestinians, on Jerusalem, on the Israelis for some time. Anything striking that you've noticed, especially over the last week, 10 days?
There are a few things. First of all, India never issued any statement from New Delhi. The only public statement available was the Security Council meeting, and since you are a member of it. The first 2 meetings are closed door, so therefore we only have a summary of the meeting put out by our ambassador, Tirumurthy. But the last 3rd meeting, which took place on Sunday, it was live, open. He made a long statement. And if you look at the reading, it says it very explicitly criticizes the rocket launching. But it only notices Israeli responses. The word condemnation was not there. If you read the text, it's not there. And the second thing is, it talks about the Temple Mount and Haram al-Sharif. Normally, people only use Haram al-Sharif, which indicates it is an Arab Islamic position. By using Temple Mount, India is saying the whole area is Arab and Jewish. So you can no longer claim, it's only an Islamic Waqf property. So that's exactly by using it, a very subtle way of saying it. The third thing is, India still pays importance to Palestinian Authority. Okay, that's the third part. We want Palestinian Authority to play a role. And the interesting thing is, you talk about a 2-state solution. And the wording may not satisfy a lot of Indians, because there is no reference to East Jerusalem. there is no reference to June 67 bombing. I would say a very mature way of handling. Because of what will be the capital, what will be the border, will be decided by the parties concerned.
Yeah.
It is an Israeli-Palestinian problem. It is not Indian problem. It is not Australian problem.
Yeah.
So let them. So we should give the space to both of them. By precluding something, we will not do that. The last thing which I would somehow were a little bit disappointed was the ambassador mentions about India's insistence on maintaining the status. I would have simply said we urge all the parties to maintain the status without going into the details. Because the moment you go into the details, what you say may be factually correct, but it doesn't please anybody. The Israelis are not very happy. The Palestinians are not very happy. I think I would have, if I had a chance, I would have simply removed any detailing of East Jerusalem issue. I would have simply said India reiterates its position on the demanding both parties or all the parties to maintain the status. But this is one thing I would have avoided.
Interesting. So we'll have to see where this conflict goes and what other directions it takes. Professor Kumaraswamy, pleasure talking to you. Thank you for that insight. And I was especially interested in your analysis of Hamas and its growth. This is something which we need to watch out for. And also it'll be interesting to see how India calibrates its position on Hamas in the months to come. Professor Kumaraswamy, thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you. And again, thank you for that insight. That's all now on Strat News Global. Catch us again next time for more on current developments, and keep watching.